I'm not going to go down without a fight, frankly. I don't want to have to fight, but I'm not going to relinquish my gender. I'm not going to not be who I am. Even if you stripped it from me, even if you beat it out of me, I'm still going to be exactly who the fuck I am. Hey guys, it's Kat, and we are in the middle of Pride Month, so I thought I would do a series of videos doing my reaction to various discourses that involve the LGBTQIA+. There are a lot of conversations right now happening specifically about Pride, and there are some general themes that I thought would be fun to address in a series of videos. And by fun, I mean I'm going to be talking about the issues, and some of these things may not be super fun. But ultimately, I want for most of the things that I post on the internet to be about celebrating the fact that we all have a diverse way of existing. And to me, Pride is about celebrating that diversity amongst those of us who exist within the acronym. So I thought that I would start out with, well, my letter of the acronym, the T, because there are a couple of different conversations I think people need to be listening to right now about specifically the state of transgender people during a time when we are in the middle of a genocide. And I want to be very clear about this before we go forward in this video. I made a video not that long ago on TikTok where I was asking the general audience, I was being dogpiled at the time, to give me your thoughts about whether or not there is indeed a trans genocide. And the majority of people who commented under that video, and this was I think about a year and a half ago, said that it wasn't happening, said that it isn't happening. And if I'm going to be honest with you, I've had a lot of conflicts with people about this particular issue, even in my personal life. I think one of the things people struggle with is that there is more than just one definition of genocide. Genocide is not a thing that happens in just one particular way. The intentional way that people are trying to make transgender people's lives unlivable in this country is indeed a genocide. That is how genocide functions. You create a situation where people are dehumanized to the degree where our society allows a culling of the population, right? I recognize that right now we live in deeply dehumanizing times. And frankly, part of the reason why I am trying to shift a lot of what I do and make more art and be more creative, and I've released merch and stuff like that, is because I've not allowed myself to do that. Some of you who have been following me for a very long time will remember when I had merch and I was a working illustrator and I had a lot of stuff that I was releasing all the time. And it's been a very, 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 very long time since I've been doing that, because I have been so invested in what I recognize now was a losing game of trying to prevent my own extinction. So frankly, I am not going to be spending a ton of time continuing having some of these conversations that we're going to have across these series of videos. While I'm always going to be a person who speaks up, I'm always going to be a person who advocates, but I've recognized that I have to take a lot of what I'm trying to do on here offline. And there's a lot of community work that I have been gearing up to do, that I have been doing for the past couple of years, that is more in line with what feels productive for me right now. Ultimately, I need to start living and existing as if I don't need to justify who I am. So I figured that I would watch a series of videos about trans folks, and I thought that I would give you guys my thoughts as a 35-year-old transgender woman who transitioned 20 years ago. Also, like usual, I will be working on some artwork while we watch them.
It's a mental illness that just it may not happen quickly, but it slowly starts to eat away at you. And we see this with people who detransition, who come out and say, I was basically lied to by these medical professionals who told me all my problems would be solved, when it just made them worse.
But at the same time, 80% of trans people report having a higher quality of life after either socially or surgically transitioning. And this has been studied through and through.
By which, do you have the...
No, it's like the National Health, or National Institute of Health. If you look up National Institute of Health, gender affirming care statistics, there's self-reported, you don't believe it?
I don't buy into their statistics, no.
I transitioned a very long time ago. I'm 35 years old. I started my hormonal transition at 19, okay? 5 years before that, I came out as trans. And the thing is, the answer to the question, am I happy about transition? Am I thankful for transition? Is my life more survivable because of transition? Is an unequivocal yes. Absolutely. I live an incredibly functional life because I transitioned. And the thing is, before I transitioned, things were quite different for me. I think that a lot of these people who are listening to these detransitioner narratives don't understand that they're getting got most of the time. You know, hormones aren't really given out without warnings about what they're going to be. I remember what it was like to sit across from a doctor and listen to, you know, all of the warnings about what could happen, right? And I remember knowing that it was worth it. In fact, it was so worth it for me that I started DIY hormoning, right? Like that was how I started. I started ordering hormones on the internet. The thing is, though, for a trans person, the risk is worth the reward because living in your body the way that it's currently functioning is not tenable. A lot of these transphobes, you know, a lot of them focus on trans men's ability to or to not have children, right? That's not really an issue for most transgender men because most transgender men aren't interested in having children. But even if they are, testosterone is not birth control. So a lot of times these men can still go and have children. There is no reason to act as if that's not possible or couldn't happen, right? Because it can. I think that a lot of people think like, oh, the way that trans people have existed has always been in this like medicalized way where, you know, they're going to these gender clinics and all these other things. But the reality is gender clinics are a relatively new thing. They have not existed for a very long time. They are not used by the vast majority of people who receive trans care, who have historically received trans care, right? Trans women, like myself, often have to do sex work, survival sex work, i.e., allow themselves to be exploited so that they can afford hormones. That's how important hormones are. And a lot of what you guys see as like the trans agenda that's ruining everything has really just been a move to legitimize transgender existence in a way where we are able to not have to do that. But here we are. We're in a situation where increasingly it's becoming legal to discriminate against transgender people. I'm only a full-time YouTuber because I became of working age before legal protections existed for trans people in 2010. What I've had to recognize is that, you know, there's not always going to be space carved out in the world for me. And so I have to carve it out for myself. That's part of why I am a DIY gal, because I refuse to accept this premise that I don't deserve to exist, because I know for a fact I do. And I refuse to accept other people's premise about who I am. And I know that that defiance is why they resent transgender people so much. I knew what I wanted to do and who I wanted to be at a very young age because I recognized my difference. I recognized that I was not like everyone else. And I think that when you notice that difference, you're called to self-examine yourself in a way that a lot of other people aren't. Like, a lot of times my estimation with cis folks is frequently that when they see transgender people, what they're wrestling with is their own internal processing around their own gender. I mentioned in a video recently an experience that I had with a man being attracted to me who I was not interested in, who I was not attracted to, who made me being trans a huge issue because he simply was attracted to me. Him being attracted to me has nothing to do with me, especially when it wasn't mutual. But because he was attracted to me, he had to wrestle with what being attracted to me meant. And I think that trans people frustrate folks. I'm not saying that we frustrate people because we're so damn sexy. What I'm saying is that I think for a lot of people, trans people and their existence in public, it's like one of the first times they've ever really processed that you could go outside of what is expected of you. And I think that that is very threatening to the status quo. That's why billionaires are particularly against trans people, right? Because at the end of the day, it frees you from control in so many ways. You can't bully me and tell me that I'm not man enough. You can't bully me and tell me that I'm not woman enough, right? You can't, because I've already examined that I don't live within your value system. And I do think that that is very unsettling to people. I do think that frequently people struggle with trans folks because they're really struggling with their own understanding of gender. Trans people are always like theoretical in a lot of these particular kinds of interactions, right? Like, as a 35-year-old transgender woman who transitioned 2 decades ago, I know I'm content in my body. I know that I'm content in who I am. I know that my life would have been very different had I not transitioned. I know that transition saved my life. I've gone through phases, right? As a woman, right? I've gone through phases. What I mean is like, I've had to re-examine my position in society a few different times, you know? For a really long time, all I wanted to do was be under a man, right? And then I had to learn, you know, definitely through the help of a lot of the feminist women in my life, that that was not what I wanted to do. Not really. It's just what I felt I had to do because I watched my mom kind of do that a little bit. I just want for people to realize that trans people, we exist outside of these hypotheticals. You know, it's maddening to me that I can be as public as I am as a trans person. And there are still people who, purely because they don't want to trust that trans people are able to speak about themselves, that they can be faithful narrators of their own experiences, they would prefer to engage with this hypothetical, right? And the thing about detransitioners is that most people who detransition will retransition. Anyway, let's watch the next video.
It's been about 7 years since my sister died, and I fear that when I tell people that she was trans and I lost her to suicide, that it would embolden the idea that being trans is a mental illness. But the truth is, when you're trans and you transition, that is the cure. That is the medicine to live your true identity, and illness is the way that people treat you along the way. For the first 26 years of her life, she was a shut-in. She wore sweatpants and a sweatshirt nearly every day, never went out and played video games and did computer programming, and she was so good at it. But when she started transitioning, when we got her a new set of clothes and she started taking hormone replacement, she lit up. And not just herself, but she lit up the room and she lit up the world. And she started going out all the time, singing karaoke, writing songs, going to open mic nights. And when I eulogized her at her funeral, I kid you not, there were hundreds and hundreds of people there, despite the fact that she'd only been going out for maybe a year or two. So believe me when I tell you that being trans is not the illness. The illness is the trauma.
So first of all, I want to say that I really appreciate that cis folks are speaking up for trans people. And frankly, I think that we need to see a lot more of that. We need to see a hell of a lot more of that. And I'm so sorry that he lost his sister. That was very emotional. When I first saw that, I was like, yeah, it was a very sad thing to see. You know, too many trans people end up dying this way. And frankly, I think that that is the point. People really want for trans people to just do it themselves, you know? And part of why I have the audacity that I do is because I refuse to be that person, you know? I thought that this was really relatable in a lot of ways because, like, I remember being a shut-in. I remember when, for me, it felt like the world was just not a place for me to be. And he's absolutely right when he says that transition is the cure. You know, transition is the thing that for a lot of us makes our life livable and functional. And I think the thing that aggravates me so much about the discourse around trans folks is that none of you have to live with our body. None of you have to live with what we are experiencing. So it's a bunch of people who aren't in the situation we're in deciding whether or not we get to, you know, whether or not we get to exist, whether or not we get to be happy. And I'll be frank with you, as time goes on, it becomes so clear to me that, like, for a lot of people, they only feel so comfortable speaking about trans people in this way because they very greatly feel validated through how they police trans people. When I see a lot of women engage in like TERF-like shit, which, side note, I did do a video. It's a discarded bit of content, but I did make a video reacting to a TERF's video. If you guys want to see that, it's on my members only page. It is something that I will not be publishing because of the recording, and I do not want to re-record. So it is what it is. You know, when I listen to a lot of TERFs and I engage with them, it's like I really genuinely understand that a lot of them are traumatized. And it's also this just resentment of our existence that, for me, I know that for a lot of TERFs, it's kind of like a power play to feel like they have control over gender in this way. Frankly, it's sad because that exists for a reason, and it's not because it's right. That exists for a reason, and it's not because it's just or because it's reasonable or rational. It exists because misogyny exists. And misogyny, I think, makes a lot of women feel like they have to reach for the closest thing they possibly can to power. And I think for a lot of women, policing gender is the closest they feel to power. And when I say policing gender, I mean in multiple different ways. Policing gender in terms of defining certain people as not quite a woman, not quite a man, not quite man enough, not quite woman enough. That's one of the ways that women, regurgitate the patriarchy. But, it happens for a reason. What I wish people understood is that transphobia is misogyny, right? Like, in so many ways, a lot of the arguments against trans people are directly connected to this idea that women must remain a permanent lower class. That is like the number one subtext of a lot of this, right? Why would a person designated male ever want to be a woman? Why would a person designated female ever want to give up the possibility of having children? It is a lot. It is a lot. But I'm not going to let transphobia prevent me from being me. I'm not going to let transphobia prevent me from existing. I'm not going to go down without a fight, frankly. I don't want to have to fight, but I'm not going to relinquish my gender. I'm not going to not be who I am. Even if you stripped it from me, even if you beat it out of me, I'm still going to be exactly who the fuck I am. And I think that it is that stick-to-itiveness and that determination and confidence in yourself and your identity that is so earth-shaking for a lot of cis people. So anyway, on that note, that is a little bit of discourse for the day. Let me know what you guys think about these videos. I'm very, very curious about your thoughts. I would love to hear, especially from transgender people underneath this video. So I'm looking forward to reading all of your transgender comments. Anyway, on that note, I will talk to you guys next time. I want you to stay hot and introspective and to always remember and never forget that you are beautiful and you are loved. Bye.